Hello, everyone. It's nice to be with you this evening. Give a couple of minutes for everybody to join and begin to tune in. Feel free, those of you who are already on the call, to drop your name and where you're calling from in the chat box. Throughout the call, you'll be able to ask questions in this chat box, and I will do my best to elevate those to the panel that we have tonight. Hey there, Teresa. Good to see you. And we'll get started in about 2 minutes here. Good to see Elizabeth. We've got a good and informative call for you. For those of you who have been on trainings with us in the past, we have 3 panelists this time instead of just one, in large part because we want to open up even more time for Q&A than we usually do. We want this to be a good catch-all opportunity to answer questions that people have as they head into really the final weeks of their campaign. We're going to talk about some of the what we believe to be the important areas of focus as you head into the final stages of the campaign. And I'm going to pose a couple of questions to get us started. But as I said, throughout the call, as things pop up, if you find yourself curious, if you have a problem that you've been trying to solve on your campaign, feel free to use the chat box to drop those in at any time. And I will try to weave them through the presentation, or we will call them out at the end of the call when we have ample time saved for Q&A. I am going to go ahead and get us started. I am Rob Booth. I'm the head of field and mobilization here at goodparty.org. And like I said, we are here to discuss how to really prepare for election day and deal with the final weeks of your campaign. We're going to cover an overview of last-minute campaign strategies that some of you might want to consider. We're going to talk about finalizing get-out-the-vote efforts. We're going to talk about the election day itself and the logistics that go into a successful election day and that really final push around getting voters out to vote for you. And we're going to talk about engaging volunteers and supporters throughout all of these efforts. We have 3 panelists with us today, all political analysts here with goodparty.org. I'll let them introduce themselves by sort of name only, and then we'll jump right into what should be a pretty fast-paced hour of discussion. Jared, do you want to start us off and then just ping pong around?
Sure. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Jared Alper, Good Party's political director, and thrilled to be here and thrilled to see some familiar faces as we're 11 days and 11 hours till showtime on election day. And I'd like to kick it to Derek to introduce himself.
Yeah, guys, thank you so much for having me. I am Derek Lane. I'm a political analyst here with Good Party. Kick it over to Alex.
Hey all, hey all. My name's Alex Gibson. I'm a political analyst here at goodparty.org. It's nice to see some familiar faces here.
Awesome. Well, let's jump right into it. First of all, I want to talk about sort of last minute campaign strategies. I'll throw this question out and any of you can jump on it and answer. But kind of to start us off here, what are some of the key focus areas in the final days leading up to an election day?
It's time to empty the tank. And what happens when you're, within 12 days, 2 weeks of an election is in many states, people are already well underway in terms of voting. And it's an opportunity for candidates to leverage all of the different diversity of tactics, many of which we offer, and I'm sure many of which have already been taken advantage of, whether it's texting or door knocking, to get out in front of the voters who haven't yet voted or who are still looking for a little bit more information before they cast their ballots, and leverage whatever opportunities are available, including and especially having a presence at the polling places in the early voting, throughout early voting up until the election, to make sure that voters have their questions answered, to make sure, especially if you're not running for president, which I don't think we have any presidential candidates on this call, that the voters find you further down the ballot where a lot of these school board and city council races tend to be. to ultimately leave no stone unturned to get as many people to get out the vote as possible. Every minute, every hour counts at this point in the election, and we're going to get into some of the different and nuanced ways of reaching those people where they are.
Great. And so much of the focus of the last part of a campaign is reaching undecided voters. What are some of the strategies that you guys recommend to focus on for reaching undecided voters in the last weeks of a campaign?
I think it's starting with, again, first and foremost, whittling out people based on their behaviors, right? So when you look at a campaign in a really meta sense, you're looking at targeting and identifying a really broad swath of people who are going to turn out to vote. And you have the luxury of doing that because you have time on your side. And as people start to make their sort of proclivities in terms of elections known, their preferences for candidates and ideas and issues, it gives candidates the opportunity to get more refined in their messaging, to identify who might be further along in their own journey, and then reach voters where they are. So we talk about texting. It's a great example of a way to reach voters who maybe are on the younger side, maybe who don't have landlines anymore, or who are sick and tired of receiving pieces of direct mail or robocalls, and identifying them, saying, hey, we're going to target these people who we know have a high propensity to vote and can be reached through cells. We can look at people's political affiliation. We can reach people a variety of different ways, but this is a moment of execution for candidates. We presumably have strategies that have been put into place, assumptions that have been hopefully tested and borne out. It is your last opportunity to go back to the drawing board and add any remaining, opportunities to the toolkit. But really beginning next week, it's execution time, making sure you're making your touches, making sure you've identified your universes of people. When we say universes, we mean coalitions of voters that can possibly be activated, reaching them in their most native tongue, whether that's texts, doors, phone calls, mail, any of the other assets that are available to campaigns, and ultimately pushing them to the polls to get out to vote.
I think what I'm hearing there too is there's an opportunity to deliver a custom message to the right voting audience, right? You mentioned reaching young people by text because that is the way that they communicate with one another, but there's the content of the text message as well that matters, right? So going to them and speaking about what you believe to be their number one issue when you have their attention right before they vote. That way they associate you with somebody who has a plan on that issue. And I think we're seeing a lot of this play out in the presidential races, of course, as well. As we enter the sort of final weeks of this campaign, people are speaking a little bit more specifically to specific audiences. You see the type of interviews that they're taking, the type of podcasts that they're going on, really making their case on specific issues about why I'm the candidate who's the most like you. And there's a level to that I think even local campaigns can do. You mentioned robocalls, and you mentioned doing voicemail drops. That's actually a new tool that we added just in the last 2 weeks to our toolkit based on demand from candidates who've asked for a solution on that. Jared, do you want to talk a little bit about that new offering and the way that candidates might be able to make use of that in the final stretch of this campaign season?
Absolutely. And it is very much something that when we're all hands on deck trying to help our candidates, we're always looking for new ways that we can be supportive to reach voters who maybe we haven't really pushed the message in front of. And to elaborate on what you said, Rob, the opportunity is to really activate people who are probably at their most engaged right now. So we've been working with candidates. Candidates have been working for months, for certainly for weeks, if not for months, learning about their community and ultimately trying to persuade them through the proper messaging channels and why they're the best choice in their election. That time is it's time to harvest the fruit that hopefully you've planted. And robocalling is a terrific way to do that, especially for people who still maybe do use traditional landlines. I don't think there's any tactic in a diversity of community that we see all over the country where you can necessarily write one off. It really is the voters that sort of dictate how you reach them. Younger communities, maybe you lean more into social media or text messaging. But we work with a lot of candidates who are running in maybe communities that are leaning on towards the older community or older side of the scale. And for those folks who maybe still are actively using their landlines, robocalling is a terrific way to make sure that they are aware of their choices on the ballot. So we offer that similarly to how we do text messaging. We help candidates set up their message. We help deploy it on their behalf. And all the candidates have to do is, send us a recording, which will help you scope out and map out. And then cover the cost per recording, which is 4.5 cents roughly. We can get it out the door, and it's just another opportunity to reach maybe a new slate of voters for those who've been working with us who you may not have had an opportunity to hit yet.
Yeah, and I know that there are a lot of deadlines coming up in many states. Some of them have even passed, things like the voter registration deadline, early voting deadline, vote by mail deadlines, and absentee mail deadlines. Each of these represent a opportunity to communicate via text, via call, via door knocking. It's another reason to be reaching a voter to remind them that opportunity to vote, if that's what they're planning on, the window's closing on it. And each of these tactics are useful for that. Some people miss these windows of opportunity to connect with voters, and to me, that's always such a mistake. Derek, you've done a ton of field work on campaigns, a ton of canvassing, a ton of work that really contributes specifically to get out the vote. I'm wondering, on the topic of mistakes, what some common mistakes are that you see candidates make in the final month, in the final weeks, to sort of fumble just before the finish.
Yeah, right before the finish line here. I think that's a great question. It's one I get from candidates quite a bit that I work with. And I think there are a couple of, a handful of common pitfalls that I see in a lot of races I work on. One is spreading your budget too thin, or sort of on the other side of that, leaving too much on the table. We don't want to leave any form of communication up for grabs. We shouldn't be sitting with $10,000 in our bank account on election day, right? We want to bring that spend down, make sure we're being diverse with our outreach. Another one is focusing on attacks, whether against yourself or against your opponent, that will have no sway on the electorate. At the end of the day, I think all of us who work on campaigns, or if our name is on the ballot, I think we place a lot of urgency on what people think is important, what's important to us and what's important to voters. Voters don't care about like inside baseball stuff, right? Our messaging for the last 2 weeks are, hey, election's coming up. Election is crucial. Election is easy. You should go vote, right? Another common pitfall I see is people slowing down their voter contact the last 2 weeks. I think they get the impression of there's not much left to do. I have won and lost elections by less than 10 votes. And so I think going out there and talking to every voter you can up until polls close is essential. Another one I hear a lot, I know a lot of you guys have talked to me about this, focusing too much on yard signs. It is the time of year, guys, where yard signs are going to get stolen. They're going to get destroyed. They're going to see your opponent's yard signs popping up in yards that you didn't see before. Signs do not vote. And at this time of year, guys, it's the nature of the beast. If you're thinking about buying more yard signs, chances are, unless you are running for president or for Congress, probably not needed at this point. But the biggest pitfall I see, and I think this is going to cover a lot of what we talk about for the rest here, is not preparing and not having a plan for election day and for those last couple of days before the election, which are, I think, the most crucial time for any campaign.
Yeah, there's so much that you said there that resonated. Number one, it seems like the through line through all of this is not leaving anything in the tank. And you mentioned the idea of trying to work your way down to make sure that you don't have any money left over in the treasury by the end of this, that you left everything on the field. A lot of the times campaigns, I know, will receive donations late in the election process. You'll get a last surge of enthusiasm from donors. It drives us campaign managers and the people who work on campaigns crazy. There's an old saying that in politics, late money is dumb money. But there are smart ways to spend that money. For the most part, my best advice, if you're finding yourself in that lucky situation to have a last cash bit of cash flow, it is to spend that money on things that drive voter contact. It is get out the vote efforts. It's canvassing. It's phone banking. Oftentimes, you'll see people just spend more money on advertisements at the end of a campaign. And usually the amounts that we're talking about are relatively small, so they don't actually move the needle by an order of magnitude. To kind of close out this section, Jared, Derek, Gibson, let's say that you get a last sizable but modest contribution to your campaign. Where would you push your chips if you could only push them in on one piece of strategy at the end of the campaign, sort of in the 11-day window that we're in now? And I'm going to start with Jared and then go to Derek and Gibson last.
I think I've seen many a campaign won in the 3 days leading up to the election. And especially in places where maybe the early vote numbers are not so monumental, it means that a lot of the voting is taking place on election day. And the plans that I try and help our candidates come up with are, well, what is your run of show for the date of the election, starting with when polls open and ending when polls close? In most communities, there are plenty of places to be on election day, and they all revolve around where people are going to vote. And it's very difficult for a candidate. I've yet to ever see once a candidate split themselves into two pieces and work two different polling places at the same time, which means it requires some help. If you can do it without having to expend any resource, all the better. But there are opportunities to even sweeten the pot for whether they're younger people like high school age students or college age students who are looking to make a couple of bucks on election day, to build a small army of people to staff those polling places, get them set up with t-shirts or with literature, make sure that your campaign's presence is felt as profoundly as it possibly can be throughout the entire day of the election, and make sure that every voter who's coming into the polls, especially if it's an election that isn't necessarily capturing the spotlight in a presidential election year, make sure that the messages do not forget to vote for races like school board or city council. Make sure that every voter is aware that these offices are on the ballot. And one of the best ways to drive turnout is by having people there when the voter is making their decision or about to ensure that they don't skip the important race where your name is.
How about you, Derek?
So for me, I think similar to Jared, if you find yourself with a last minute surge, my advice is to invest it in manpower or some other form of direct voter contact, where you're going to be able to push people directly out to the polls. So either canvassing, phone bankers, poll greeters, things like that, I think is a great way to invest any sort of like last minute large surge in finances.
Yeah, I just echo what Lane said. I think that's exactly right. You want to get some money in canvassers' pockets, have them do lit drops. So maybe a bit of money on press or print, have them do a literature drop in the neighborhood. I definitely do that. I think in previous campaigns I've worked, another thing that I've used money for in the final stretch is some kind of souls to the polls event. So ensuring that your base or your voters get out to the polls on larger elections. If you can do something similar on a smaller scale, I think it'd be it's the easiest way to ensure votes and count the votes for you at the ballot box.
So let's move into talking about GOTV and getting out the vote more specifically. What are the most effective methods of driving voter turnout in the final 2 weeks of a campaign? Alex Gibson, you mentioned Souls to Polls. Can you talk a little bit more about what Souls to Polls style programming looks like for those who aren't familiar with the jargon? This is oftentimes doing outreach at local churches and taking people directly from churches or from places that have a small collection of people, like baseball games, football games, that sort of thing, and then getting them to go as a group from that location to the polls. But Alex, let's talk more about programs like that that have been successful in your experience. And then Derek and Jared, I'd love for you two to chime in on this question as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a bit young. Maybe souls to the polls is a political term that started with the church. I know it just more as just mobilizing voters to the poll place in the precinct on election day. So that's what I use it as in college. As the political director or the campaign manager on a bunch of races, that's something that we do. We'd set up central locations for people to get picked up, drop to the polling place, and then have a ride back to where we picked them up from. On a smaller scale, we also did this with volunteers. So if a volunteer is riding to the election to staff a precinct, then they can also take a few voters with them, and the voters can find their own way back. Um, you can do gas stipends if you want to dip into the money pot again. But I mean, in the final stretch, volunteers are usually operating off of passion, so I don't think they need much of your money. And then also, utilizing this term, I think anyone who's worked in politics, and maybe a few of you while doing some research on your campaigns have heard the term, but just vote tripling. I think that's also a thing you can do. It's not exactly souls to the polls, but if you have someone who's going to vote for you, then you know that they know at least three people. So you can kind of take that one vote and turn it into four. And they can just ride with their family, their daughter, their sons, their husband to the poll place. And you can pretty much ensure that you have more than one vote headed to the polling place for you.
That really is I mean, if you accept the premise that campaigns are really an exercise in building a network, and I would very much lean in favor of that argument. Getting out the vote is the big call to action, and the best way to successfully build a get out the vote operation is by turning one vote that you already have into 10 more. And it's an ask that I think, especially this late in the game, some candidates almost are reluctant for whatever reason to make. And part of it is just it's very difficult to stay disciplined and stay in the pocket. And I would want to double down without jumping too far back. What Derek was referring to is really an exercise in message discipline and just general campaign discipline. Now is the time of year where I think it's very easy. Maybe attacks are coming in. There are events coming every single day. It's easy to get tired. It's easy to forget kind of what the ultimate goal is, which is to get people out to vote. And if you're not focusing on that, and especially if your opponents are trying to get you away from that goal, you're setting yourself up for an inefficient or potentially disappointing election day. And so what I always try and work with candidates to do is just think about who's already voting, think about who you have in your back pocket, and make an ask. And that ask is, hey, thank you so much for supporting me. Do you know 5 people who maybe weren't planning on voting who might be able to get out the vote too? And one vote turns into 5, turns into 10, 20, 50. That ultimately is how campaigns are successful. And it starts with a simple ask of the people who are most inclined to support you in the first place. And so if you're thinking around election day, hey, who have I not talked to today? That's a very simple and easy ask. Let them know exactly how long the polls are open. See if they need help getting to the polls. That's a nice little touch. But more than anything, it's make sure you vote and make sure you bring 5 other people who can come along for the ride.
Yeah, and just to double tap on that, I mean in order for us to have these conversations about vote tripling, right, and bringing friends and family to the polls with them, you got to make sure that you're continuing to contact voters. I'm always, if you've been on a call, one of these calls with me, you know I'm a Canvas guy. I'm a big Canvas stan. Canvassing is the most effective way to reach voters where they're at. The most effective way to connect them to your campaign operation, and you should be utilizing all available forms of contact you have in your budget, and manpower resources to reach out to these folks in the last couple of days. To do that vote tripling, I think is super important.
Yeah, on that subject of canvassing or even sending text messages or phone banking, if you're doing direct outreach for get out the vote, what are some of the ways that you can be segmenting those lists or targeting them to focus on the most important universes of voters?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, I would say the 2 general groups of people that get the most amount of outreach during GOTV are folks who have requested an absentee ballot, have requested a mail-in ballot. We know that they have a ballot in their hand. Obviously, these are pretty high on the priority list for outreach. You want to make sure that you're having contact with these folks before they actually cast that ballot. And the other group of people, I would say generally are known or likely supporters who haven't cast their ballot yet. Most states give us readouts of who has and hasn't voted early. And whenever possible, we should be removing those folks who have voted from all of our get out the vote outreach efforts. Doesn't make any sense to reach out to them if they've already cast their ballot. There's no more chance for persuasion, no more chance for turnout. They've done the thing. So
There's
go
there's
ahead.
you know, one of the luxuries of running in a nonpartisan or running as an independent unaffiliated candidate is that you have the opportunity to cast a really wide net. And part of the exercise of campaigning is, you know, spending chunks of time, especially between Labor Day and like the 15th of October, really honing in on who your voters are. But at the end of the day, a lot of people who maybe haven't been engaged with are going to vote. And so the mistake I would want to avoid candidates on this call making is feeling like all of the time spent identifying maybe who your core supporters might be, the siloing them alone and not reaching out to people who might be a little bit on the outside looking in. I see this especially done typically on political lines for races that oftentimes aren't hyper partisan. So someone who might be more progressive leaning will look at a universe of voters and say, I don't really feel like reaching out to any of the Republican registered voters because I just don't think that they're going to vote for someone like me. I'll say, well, why? Say, I don't know. It's just Republicans don't vote for people who might be left of center. It's like they might not even know who's running for school board. And the one thing that might be missing is one touch to them saying, hey, this is what I care about. If you care about the same thing, I'd ask for your vote. You never know. So it is obviously resource is a huge driver of this and being efficient in how you reach people. But it's equally important not to just sort of discard folks who maybe haven't been engaged with from anybody on the premise that, you know, politics is going to be a barrier for them to cast a ballot, especially if they're not maybe the most engaged but are planning on voting.
And just also giving the other side of the coin for what Lane was describing, which is usually called VBM chase. You're chasing the folks who requested their ballot. You can also do the opposite of that, which is look for the folks who, well, I guess not the opposite, but look for the folks who have not returned their ballot, who haven't done it yet. Folks who did not request, folks who are not counted as a vote yet, and chase those folks as well to kind of get a good idea of who you would be not wasting your time with. You don't want to reach out to or get to a voter store and they're like, yeah, I voted, you know, a week ago or something. So keep that in mind also.
Awesome. Well, I want to pivot into talking about the message and sort of what the core message should be in the final days of a campaign. But I also want to acknowledge a question from the chat here. Terrence sort of asked about the balance between get out the vote messaging and answering opponents' attacks. And if I can distill this, I'd like to sort of frame it as what strategies can be used to handle negative attacks or misinformation in the final days. And Jared, I think you'd be a good person to take first stab at this.
Yeah, and the guidance I'd provide to you, Terrence, is really understanding kind of what's sticking and what might just be noise in the wind. And again, my sort of whole driver in candidate work and especially get out the vote communication is being disciplined, knowing that for the most part, Derek alluded to it earlier, a lot of people are not as plugged into the political scene as the two candidates who are running for any given office are. And a lot of time and a lot of hours are spent each week, I think, from all of the people on this call, hearing from candidates saying, someone said this about my campaign, and I can't let it go unchallenged. And we'll say, well, what is it? And it'll be something very, you know, someone said this at a council meeting, and I just don't like it. We'll say, well, yeah, it might be untrue, it might be gratuitous, but does anyone who wasn't at that meeting of 4 people in a town of 10,000, do they have any idea what's going on? And if the answer is no, why breathe life into it? And so what I think the first step in sort of responding to attacks is understanding if it's a pitch that needs to be swung at. And more often than not, I think the answer is probably no. There are certainly moments where someone, you know, picks up a live one or you feel like it's so egregious that it needs to be answered. And I think in more often than not, there is an opportunity to turn any of these attacks on their head, especially in these smaller local offices where people are so sick and tired of distortion and misinformation and it's character attacks on people who are very local to the community, that it's an opportunity to say, look, there's 2 candidates in a race and one of them is going low. Not to overly quote Michelle Obama, I don't think she originated the term, But there is truth to the idea that the person who goes low is defeated by the person who goes high more often than not. So I would urge message discipline. I would urge, being able to flip an attack on its head when it comes. And more than anything, making sure that you're reaching out to the voters who probably have no idea what's going on, staying in your lane and doing everything you can to keep, the finish line in front of you, as opposed to on the side or even behind.
That's a tremendous point. So pivoting into what that discipline should be on, really what is the message in the final days?
It's contrast. The candidates who've worked with me on this call have heard me say it many, many, many times over. And it is something I say many, many times over because I have message discipline. And that is elections. Elections are about choice. And it's not enough, I don't believe, and I think this is well substantiated, that a candidate says, I'm the best choice, vote for me, and here's why. I think voters are earnestly looking for, what are their options and why is this candidate better than another candidate? And there is a fine line. You don't want to go negative or attack someone else and say this person's the worst choice because they're terrible people. But there are distinguishing characteristics or ideas or values between two candidates. And being able to present yourself and say, here's what I stand for, here's what I'm prepared to do if I'm elected, here's why I'm either better, especially if you're running against an incumbent, here's how I'm going to change our community for the better. And draw contrast to someone else whose values or ideas are different. And ultimately, if a voter likes where you stand, and many voters like where you stand, you're going to have success. And if they like the other person's values or the other person makes a stronger, compelling argument about why they're the better choice, they may have success too. So really contrast, driving that choice, helping voters understand the ballot and helping them understand the consequences of the decision that they're going to be making is the driver of all things messaging in my mind.
Awesome. To double click into that a little bit further, we talked before about the importance of targeting undecided voters during this period. I'm curious from the panel, what are some of the ways that you can ensure that your messaging in this phase of the campaign resonates with those undecided voters? We talked about custom messages for custom audiences and the way that our tools can help with that. But what does this look like in practice?
I'm going to ask Derek, you take the lead here. I'm cognizant of my speaking too much.
Yeah, I think it's a hard question because I might be of a slightly different mind on reaching undecided voters in this phase of the campaign. I mean, ultimately, I think if you are taking Jared's advice and you're leading with your values and you're talking about how easy it is to vote, I think ultimately that's your best chance at persuading any remaining undecided voters who have been paying attention, and ultimately just contacting them at all. I think and giving them that that touch from your campaign is going to be helpful. But that said, I don't know if at this point, 12 days out, if persuasion is the avenue that I would take for my campaign. What do you think about that, Gibbs? Not to put you on the spot, but
no, you're good. It's not on the spot at all. I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think it depends, right? You have your voters. No two people are the same, unless maybe someone has a twin out there. But I think for the most part, no two people are the same. You may canvas. Well, you definitely should be knocking on some doors if you're 12 days off from the election. So getting in front of folks is a good way to reach out to a voter who is undecided. And some of you who have already canvassed it may have noticed this already. You talk to a person, they're not really interested in the partisan nature of politics, but you're a candidate and you came to talk to them. So they're pretty excited about that. What's your name again? Yeah, I'm going to make sure I vote for you. Just putting a face to a name is really important for a lot of voters, and they really do take it to heart when candidates reach out to them. Again, from a strategic standpoint, I don't know if I'd switch to persuasion for the undecideds 12 days out, but yeah, I think you're doing the good work if you're already doing some voter outreach methods.
Yeah, it's a bit of a trick question there. We're in the get out the vote stage. All of your communications should be focused on getting out the vote. And in some cases, putting just your best encapsulation of who you are in front of voters who are maybe just tuning in for the first time, especially in these local races. So it should be kept as relatively simple as possible. Here's a topic that I know Derek and Jared, you've alluded to throughout the presentation, and that is election day logistics and the importance of election day logistics. Why is preparing for election day itself, why is this so essential?
It is, it's the last day of the campaign, and we're coming up on it, 12 days away. I know that that's hard to fathom for the folks on this call on our team, and I'm sure even more so for the candidates who've been living and breathing their campaign since the moment they started. But this is your last opportunity, election day, and it's also an opportunity to face the largest amount of single people who are going to cast a ballot for you until either the next time you run and hopefully the next time you run for re-election. So the idea here, right, is how do you nail election day? And the only way to really nail it is to have a pretty structured idea of where you need to be and what you need to accomplish throughout the entire day. And I don't think it's necessarily, you know, an exercise in brain surgery, but it is just understanding some of the key dynamics that go into play. So first and foremost, when do the polls open? If you don't know that, that's a good place to start. And shortly thereafter, figure out when they close. What are the rules? In some states, you're allowed to vote as long as you're online at the moment the polls close. In other states, you might have to buy yourself some more leeway and get people to the polls 30 minutes before the polls close. Where are the precincts? We can help you with this, but understanding where are the sort of most voter-rich precincts in your community, assuming maybe you can't be at every single polling place. So where do you need to have bodies to be able to get out the vote? And also, where's the candidate going to be? When is the candidate going to vote? Please, 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 if you're running, don't forget to vote. I have had that happen before. And potentially even worse if you're married or have a partner. If they don't vote, it's a hard conversation, especially in races where they're decided by 4 or 5 votes total. So making sure that you're budgeting out and the candidate has a plan when they're going to vote is critical. Making sure that anyone in the household or any of the friends in the family are being followed up with to make sure that they get out to vote. And then knowing where you need to be throughout the day. Honestly, it is as simple as saying polls open at 7, polls close at 7 p.m. Each hour of the day, here's where I'm going to be. Here's where I know I've got my bases covered because people are going to be at the polls for me. Here's when I'm eating lunch. Don't forget to eat on election day. And here's where I'm going to watch the returns coming back.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, the best get out the vote operations are prepared and they're flexible and they're executed smoothly. I think if you're to sort of sum up what Jared said, if you're thinking about where am I going to be as a candidate throughout the day, where are my volunteers going to be and what are they doing, and what's my plan for capturing and recording results. I think with those 3 questions in mind, that you can build yourself out a fairly comprehensive and effective get out the vote election day plan for yourself in your campaign.
Yeah, I'd agree with both of my panelists here. That sounds so formal, but yeah, I'd agree with both of them. I think the only thing I'd add is this is your day. Like election day, the election day is the day for down ballot candidates. Most of the time, voters know who they're voting for at the top of the ticket. This is the last moment to really educate voters. It's really like a leave it all on the table kind of thing before November 6th comes, and you're like, well, I could have done that, but I didn't. And then for my next point, I'm probably going to speak right to the heart of the anxiety for all of the candidates, which is voter suppression tactics. I live in Florida, so that happens a bit often. Maybe there's a group spreading the wrong polling location for a certain neighborhood, so folks go to the wrong place. There's a bunch of different things that can happen, but being on the ground, having people on the ground to kind of divert all of the voter suppression tactics made by the opposition is going to be really important for you. And it's also why it's important to have a really solid volunteer base at all of the necessary and relevant polling locations for you.
What are some of the contingency plans that campaigns should have in place on election day?
Great question. Pack an umbrella and check the weather before I should say, check the weather. And if it looks like it could rain, pack an umbrella and pack several for your team. Rainy days on elections are actually, I know it sounds silly, but they do have a pretty dramatic impact on turnout, especially for a day of election voters. And the reason is not so complicated. If someone wakes up, especially if you're in a a state where maybe the top of ticket races are already decided, like a very progressive state, a very conservative state, a lot of voters will just do the math and say, you know what, maybe my vote doesn't matter. If I live in New York, it's a pretty blue state, and you see down ballot turnout suffer because their voters look out, it's rainy, and they say, why should I vote for president if that election's already decided? And so the way you counteract that is by one, making it possible for people to vote, offering to pick people up. If your volunteers are standing out in the rain, get them an umbrella, and they'll be more inclined to stay there than if it's pouring on them. And just understanding how to reach people over the phones, especially in the event like something happens that changes people's turnout behavior. That's sort of the extreme example where acts of God impact an election. And a more broad, contingency example is you could plan everything out, and maybe for whatever reason, you go to the highest turnout poll, and there's a lull, right? From 10 to 12, or from 1 to 4, you're just sitting around, you're not seeing any voters. Knowing where the next place you can go, right? It's important not to be twiddling your thumbs on election day. If you feel like the volume of people you need to reach aren't showing up, know where you need to go next. Get on the phone. Make sure every single person who's at the polls for you, if you don't already have their information, that you have their contact information accessible. Make some calls. Hey, I'm at the polling place. There's nobody here. Is it busy at your end? You might get, we're drowning over here. It's the most busy we've ever seen. You need to get over here right now. So part of the contingency plan is just having access to information and being flexible, like Derek alluded to, and not sort of being uncertain. Make decisions the day of. Read the environment, and then go where the voters are, and bring an umbrella in case it rains.
Going back to I think I did this for the first time in 2012. One of the campaigns where I was working on a big initiative. We were asked, what our plan was for yard signs, and I actually fought pretty hard against spending on yard signs, and instead said, let's take all that funding and let's put it into door hangers. So pieces of literature that you can literally hang on someone's doorknob. And I purposefully waited until the night before the election, and I had a massive organized canvas go out and put those door hangers up after hours. So essentially, after it was dark out, that way the last thing that every single one of those voters saw before they went to work, and this was 2012, so there wasn't such a work from home economy. Before people left for work, one of the last things that they saw was this door hanger that told them which way to vote. And I still feel pretty strongly about that as a good election day strategy, especially in local elections where that most of the people are maybe less familiar with the candidates that are going to be running down ballot. It's a good opportunity to make sure that they see you, they see the things that you stand for, and they're able to make an informed decision. So I'd place that for anyone who maybe, like I said before, is coming into some late funds or has a little bit of money left over for print run. That can be a really effective election day, or at least the last 48 hours before an election day tactic. Derek, Jared, Alex, are there any tactics like that you think should be worked in? What are some of your favorite secrets or things that you truly believe in for local candidates running that you could see fitting in beyond the things that you've already talked about in an election day or election night strategy?
Yeah, I'm going to double click on the late night door hanger, early morning door hanger shifts. For one thing, I remember doing that on that initiative back in 2012. Might have been the funnest canvassing I've ever done. If you live in a well lit and walkable neighborhood, I think it's an absolute great sort of last minute push. Because like Rob said, when they go out their door in the morning, they're going to see your door hanger. If possible, have their polling location on the door hanger, split them up by location if you can, so that they know exactly where to go, when it's going to be open, and have some little piece of your campaign information. But I think that's a great idea. I think it's really fun for volunteers if you're trying to get volunteers in, and it's not your typical canvassing. You can cover a lot of ground when you're just throwing up door hangers in the middle of the night. So
In terms of the general practice, like there's a lot of bells and whistles that I think are nice to think about. And maybe if you're running for races like president or senate, you can come up with ways to get hyper targeted on digital ads. I've seen someone, have a plane that writes in the sky. I'm sure there's a word for it, but it eludes me, above the polling places. I think it's creative and it sounds nice, but ultimately you win these campaigns with hard work, and that's going where the voters are. So I think there's not necessarily a magic bullet solution. It's an opportunity to be creative leading up to the election day. Make sending texts the night before or day of election day, reminding people where they can go to vote. Knocking on doors, leaving literature the night before or the day of the election. The other thing that we haven't talked about is where you might want to park yourself as the candidate, who is the ultimate driver of behavior for people. It's important to have volunteers, but ultimately the candidate is both the most important and potentially least efficient get out the vote person at the polls, because everyone wants to talk to the candidate. So the volunteers can distribute 10 pieces of literature a second, but the candidate is getting spoken to. They're getting asked questions. So it's important to really maximize the time of the candidate. And sometimes that isn't at the polling places. It's making visits, but it's not spending the whole day there. Whenever I run campaigns that are in condensed sort of metro areas, subway stops or train stations, after school pickup, hot Main Street for the lunch rush, places where you're going to run into as many people as you can. And the push for the candidate is, if you haven't voted, the nearest polling place is right here. If you don't know who you're voting for, do you know who you're voting for school board or for city council? I think people would be surprised at how frequently the answer is no. It's your last opportunity to make a pitch. Hey, the polling place is right here. I'm running for city council. It's important you vote for city council. Go out and vote. And that's something that is much more impactfully done by the candidate, sometimes away from the polls, versus the people who are not as affiliated with the campaign or not as fluent in candidateese, who are able to distribute the important materials where people are voting.
Great. We're going to pivot into talking about mobilizing volunteers and sort of human resources in the final stages of the campaign. I do want to invite people again, feel free to ask questions in the chat. I would love to begin to start collecting some of those that we can ask during the Q&A section. But I want to tee this up. What are some effective strategies for mobilizing volunteers in the final days, for keeping them motivated, for that matter, and engaged? We've asked a lot of volunteers up until this point. How do we help them to finish strong so we can finish strong?
I think the mobilization strategy that's overlooked and is more of just an action is making asks of people. I mean, if you don't ask, you don't get. And I think a lot of people who have said, I mean, any candidate who's ever run has at least a few people that they've met along the journey who says, if you ever need anything, I'm there for you. Well, election day is the time to pull out all the favors. And again, it's coming up saying, hey, listen, election day from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Can you work a 3-hour shift at the polls? Yes. If yes, here's where I need you to go the most. And if they can bring someone along for the ride, that's even better. Like if the husband or the wife can volunteer, then bring along the significant other, bring along the kids, see who can contribute, and then put them in positions where they can do the highest and most meaningful actions for your campaign, which is getting out the vote at the place that people are voting. The only additional thing I think is really important is find a way to celebrate the end of the campaign, hopefully with success. But even if the campaign ultimately doesn't go the way of the candidate, it's still a celebration of what you've built. And that's especially important for the people who've invested in you along the way. So the best way to get people both to mobilize and also to be supportive is by inviting them to something to celebrate the end of the campaign. And I understand, I hear this from a lot of candidates, that it's a grueling day. It's exhausting. The prospect of potentially losing is draining. The prospect of potentially winning is also exhausting in its own way. But I don't think it's a wise decision for a candidate to just be home on their living room couch, totally alone in the dark with the TV on, watching results come in. I think it's an opportunity. It doesn't have to be a big, gala or extravaganza. Go to a local restaurant, go to a bar, invite some friends and family to stop by while the results come in, celebrate with the people closest to you, take it all in. And I think if you invite people to something like that, you're also going to have a high impact opportunity to get people to turn out throughout the day to support you.
Yeah, I even like being able to have special bracelets for the people who have done some of the higher yield volunteer actions. And maybe if that's somebody who gets a free drink or gets access to preferential seating in the area, there are ways to incentivize and reward the people who do the most for your campaign. And Jared, you make me think that there are many different asks that you can put out there. Yes, we want people knocking on doors and doing canvassing in high trafficked areas, but we also need venues, right? We need spaces for these events. And if you have business owners who maybe are less likely to go out and knock doors or make phone calls for you, they might put a sign up that says vote today and vote for candidate X, right? So there are other ways, and it's basically cash in all of the chips. Make sure someone is doing something that hopefully indicates their support for you throughout the end of a campaign. We talked a little bit about vote multiplying and that idea of, well, if you're going to turn out and vote for me, bring a couple of your friends. Another tactic that is near and dear to my heart is relational organizing. Derek, can you talk a little bit about how to leverage relational organizing in your volunteer asks?
Yeah, so relational organizing, I think, is a really effective way to leverage your supporters networks for last minute touches. Essentially, the ask of your volunteers is that they call or text 5 people they personally know who live in the district, and ask what their plan to vote is. Get them to commit to a plan and ultimately turn them out to vote. And I mean, study after study, a fairly large study out of Columbia relatively recently showed that 8.3% increase in turnout for those who got a relational text from somebody they knew about a campaign. So for many candidates, many of our candidates who are running in very small races, 8.3% is the difference between taking office in January or like a really close second place finish. So I think it's a great tactic to encourage your supporters to do, but also to motivate additional voters in the community.
Excellent. Final thoughts on volunteers and sort of mobilizing human resources in support of your campaign.
Yeah, there is one thought that comes to mind as you guys talk about relational organizing. I went to an organizing boot camp early on in my organizing career where you're learning how to mobilize your volunteers. And one term that stuck with me, I've never been a big social media person, so I think that maybe that's why it stuck with me, but it was called parasocial organizing, where you're basically telling people, hey, hashtag this, post a photo. Again, I'm not big on social media, so I'm not sure how it works, but I know we shouldn't underestimate the power of social media and the amount of followers one of your voters has. If they post something locally, I think that has a pretty big impact. So that's the only thing I'll probably flag.
And I think it's good too to push that sort of organic social media momentum around election day. Like, for instance, Meta platforms, the political advertising ends Tuesday the 29th, right? You can't request any more ads. There is a deadline for that. So for most of us who are doing that type of advertising through Facebook or Instagram, you're going to need something to replace that paid advertising. And I think drilling down on some more organic pieces of content is going to be more effective. So I think that's a great idea, Gibson.
Before we go into Q&A, I want to talk a little bit about some of the ways that goodparty.org can support candidates in the final push of this campaign. One thing that I know is pretty exciting, some of you probably saw this pop up in your email in the last week, but we have rolled out a beta version of our new AI campaign assistant. This is a really powerful tool, though it is a beta, and it is not perfect. That's the giant asterisk that I'll say. But this tool, if you haven't checked it out, is available to all goodparty.org candidates, and you're able to have a sounding board. You can ask it, what are some of the things that I should be doing in the tail end of my campaign? You can ask it to write a get out the vote script for phone, for door knocking, for pretty much anything. You can even ask it to have you write your acceptance speech should you win on election day. So definitely, I would say check out that tool. Jared, Derek, Alex, what are the other tools in other ways that you find yourself supporting candidates? Some of the requests that I know that each of you are filling as we wrap up the campaign.
It all starts with opting into the pro tier service at goodparty.org. It's a $10 a month subscription, and it's cancel at any time. And I can't imagine, unless your election's not on November 5th, that you're going for more than a month with us. But it is the opportunity to, for $10, just get access to all of these different tools and tactics that we've talked about this evening. I know that myself, Derek, Alex, the other members of our political team are actively building and deploying different peer-to-peer messaging campaigns. We have candidates, over 100 candidates now, that are using the e-canvassing application that we've partnered with in order to reach voters door to door. Our new robocalling feature is available for use for those who are opted into the pro feature. Again, it's another really a useful and impactful means of reaching voters who aren't accessible through text and potentially through doors by calling landlines. And the data is a big driver of this. I know it's the foundation, not necessarily the execution. But if you're on this call saying, gosh, I don't know where I need to be on election day, or I don't know who's already voted, and I'm really interested in getting that information to be able to define who I need to reach, that's something that we can help with. And we are eager to have those conversations from now through really, like, the first is kind of where we're building up to and giving ourselves an opportunity. Hey, James. Yeah, we have a conversation to be had about that. It's an opportunity to be able to get all of your ducks in a row. We're here to help you, put the pieces on the board, because we're closing in on get out the vote time and execution moment. So eager to have those conversations with all of you.
Awesome. Well, I'd love to open up the floor at this point for questions. Feel free, folks, drop your questions into the chat box. We've got 10 to 15 minutes to spend on Q&A, should you guys have them. But thank you, Jared, Derek, and Alex, for the quick bit of conversation through these topics so far. While we wait and see if there are any questions from the attendees here, is there anything that you feel like you would like to add? Anything that you folks feel like we didn't get to talk about?
Yeah, one of the things I think I want to talk about, I think is very important for candidates to keep in mind over these last 12 days, is to find that balance between emptying the tank and also keeping yourself some relative level of healthy. I will say, I will brag a little bit. That I had a candidate who canvassed so much that she got a stress fracture on her foot. I see her hanging out here in this Zoom call with us today. So, but there is a balance. Make sure you guys are drinking water. Make sure you guys are getting sleep. Make sure you are eating right. Because you don't want to fall sick or be exhausted when you wake up that Tuesday morning any more than you need to be. It's a long stretch. 12 days is short, but it's also like the longest time that you guys will probably deal with this year. So just keep yourself healthy and maintain, because we need you all the way through till 8 p.m. most places on election day. So.
Awesome. So we've got a couple of questions rolling in here. Martha in Minnesota asks, do you know what the Minnesota regulation is for write-in candidates standing at the polling place? And for this, Martha, I'd say that it is likely the same as it is for any candidate. And there are usually designated distances that candidates are allowed to be within the actual polling place themselves while actively campaigning. So you can go into your polling place and vote, but when you come out, there's usually a space set up for you to do greeting. The safest thing for you to do is when you arrive at the polling place, after you've had the opportunity to vote, ask at that polling place, where is the designated candidate zone? That's usually what I tell people. Similar question, Erica Snyder asks, how do you deal with the limitations of how close volunteers can be to polling places? What's the best practice for volunteers to follow? What's the best collateral to hand out at the polls? I'll let the panel respond to this one, but I will give my opinion. The best collateral to hand out at the polls, I think, is water, especially on a hot day. I did some campaigning recently in North Carolina, and I don't think we've ever been so popular handing out bottles of water. We also brought musicians with us who were playing music and sort of brought people over to us, even though we were pretty far removed from where people were lining up. So because we had, the fun sort of party at the polls atmosphere, people were coming over to us before going in and then after going in to vote. But I don't know. What do you think about that, Jared, Derek?
Yeah, it's a lot of states have very different rules around like what sorts of electioneering you're allowed to do, how close you are, how close your signs can be. My strongest recommendation for anybody is to figure out what those rules are. Like for instance, in Maine, where I live, you're not allowed to hand out collateral at the polls. I think anything bigger than $50, it's a very specific law. You can't be any more than 250 feet from the entrance of the polling place. So I think figuring out what those regulations are for your community to make sure that you don't run afoul of them is going to help you plan those out. And Martha, I did drop the rules for Minnesota there in the chat for what the rules are for electioneering at polling places if you want to take a closer look at that.
Yeah, I would 100% double down. And most of this information is available online with your county board of elections or your state board of elections. Another way to get the information, by the way, is just to, when you vote, go ask any of the poll watchers or the poll workers what the standard is. But for sure, if anyone's seen the show Curb Your Enthusiasm, it's a major subplot of the last season when Larry gets arrested for delivering water at the poll workers. So I think if you're within the realm of being able to deliver water, it's a nice idea. I've seen candidates have those little custom labels that they have on the water that they can give out to people. Anything a voter can take into the polling place that's small and that can be easily produced in a short period of time, whether it's stickers or little business card sized slips of information, is generally a good thing. And for sure, if you can create an atmosphere of excitement and energy at the polls, whether it's playing music or just having a whole bunch of people wearing t-shirts or wearing branded collateral with the campaign, if it's hats or shirts or whatever it might be, distributing literature is really the way to hit a home run out of here.
Mason asks, is it better to recruit high schoolers or retirees for election day? Mason, I think that it's both and it's equal. You want both folks. Retirees are probably able to help you throughout the day on election day. High schoolers, depending on what the schedule is, can help you for those evening shifts. And I think it's just about finding the right volunteer ask for the right volunteer. I think retirees probably better for polling places and watching the polls. High school students better for going out and doing a last round of door knocking. They're also a great group to send out to do that door hanging effort that Derek and I were talking about. That's my take on that. How about the panel?
Whoever's available. I think it's an all hand on deck moment, and like Rob made plain, right? High school students probably not available from the moment first period starts to the moment however many periods are in a day. It's been a while since I was in high school. I think it was 9 for us ends. So say from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., the high school student isn't going to get you very far. And that's an opportunity to structure people in around that. So if it's an older person who's maybe retired, or someone who isn't going to work that day, or someone who works remotely, there are plenty of people who might be able to escape during their lunch hour or take a half day if they're willing, if they're really close to the campaign. Loading them up for those days, those hours where maybe a younger student isn't available, swapping them out with someone when they leave high school is the way I would structure the program. And it really does come down to just what's your plan. From the moment polls open to the moment polls close, who's going where, and when is the shift ending and being swapped out with a new body if there's one available.
Mhm. Perfect. We have a couple of questions in here about creating voter files for doing robocalls and texts, and sort of what the process is to be able to take advantage of those. Can the team please speak to the process? You know, once someone signs up as a Good Party Pro candidate, what does that all look like from there? And then what are sort of the tools that are on offer, as well as some of the limitations or guidelines that we work within?
Yeah, so if you've already signed up for goodparty.org Pro, the good news is that these programs can actually be scheduled directly through our tool. So if you haven't been in our campaign tracker in a while, this is a great opportunity to go into your dashboard, click on the campaign tracker tab, and look at all of the different voter contact methods that we've made available. If you're interested in scheduling, for example, a peer-to-peer text campaign, all you have to do is click the schedule a text campaign button. You fill out some of the information, including what you want to say. The AI can even write the script for you. The voter data can be attached to the script. A member of our team gets notified that, X candidate wants to do a peer-to-peer campaign, and then we'll load it up and get out in touch with you on the next steps. But it all starts with the candidate saying, hey, I'm committed to doing a peer-to-peer campaign or a robocall, or I want to go door to door. I'm pulling data to go door to door, and scheduling those programs through our tool. And if you schedule it, we'll be in touch with you very, very shortly after, certainly within 24 hours of the request being made, to be able to get this out the door. The thing I would stress, is every day that we get closer to the election, every candidate is coming forward with intensity and velocity as befits the position they're in. So we do ask, if you know you want to do a peer-to-peer campaign, don't wait, don't sit on it. Our deadline to get new campaigns out the door, knowing that the weekend before the election is going to be hectic and intense, is the 1st, which is a Friday, 11/1. So please make sure that you get your campaign, your scheduled campaign in no later than that. But certainly if you know that you want to do one of these campaigns, schedule it through the tool, reach out to a member of our team. We'll get in touch with you and make sure that we can get this moving, because now is the time to be able to get these campaigns off the ground.
So, last question coming from Mason: do or don't shake hands and thank voters for voting when there's a long line?
I say do, for sure.
Do, yeah.
Yeah. I think definitely thank people. And this in part opens up something that I wanted to talk about anyways, which is whether you win or lose this election. Running for office is oftentimes a step process. We have had, even in the short time that we've been supporting candidates who have run and lost, and then run a second campaign and won. I'm thinking about in 2022, we had a candidate here in Maine named Ben Weisner, who ran for office in Lewiston, Auburn, and lost his initial campaign. But almost immediately, upon a day or two after filed to run again for a different seat, and ended up winning that campaign. And the name recognition that he had built up for himself in that first campaign carried over into the next campaign. And this guy, who was a first-time candidate running against an incumbent, was able to win that second campaign because of the strong campaigning that he had done the first time around. He built up the momentum. And that's not a totally unfamiliar story. And for you, Mason, the question of do or do not shake hands, I think you're always better leaving a positive impression on people because you might have to court their vote again. Even in the best case scenario where you win the election, these are voters who you're going to be going back to hopefully at the end of your term, asking them to help to support you to be able to run again. So important always to be thinking about the next go round. And I don't know, Jared, Derek, Alex, and any sort of parting words of wisdom for people, win, lose, or draw on election day, how to handle that news, and what comes next if you win or if you lose.
My final thoughts for everybody who's running for office, win, lose, or otherwise, running for office is a very hard thing to do. I think in today's political climate, it's a very courageous thing to do. And I think regardless of whether you come out victorious or you come in a little under, you should feel proud of the work that you've done. You should leave it all out in the field here in these last 12 days to make sure that you do feel good about the work you put in. But what you're doing is important, and you should keep that in the back of your mind as you're looking for motivation over these last 2 weeks here.
I think enjoy the ride. I mean, for those people who've been running for a long time and it's your first time running for office, I think you've probably learned more about yourself and your community than you've ever had before. And this is an opportunity to really end the campaign on the highest note you possibly can, regardless of the result. And so take these next 11, 12 days and leave everything that you've got on the line and put yourself out there. Make sure you do everything you can to reach as many voters as you possibly can. And then on the day of the election, it is that opportunity to work hard, but know that you've done everything you possibly could. And take it all in. And again, find an opportunity to celebrate the people who've been there with you along the way. Enjoy the day. Take note of where you are throughout the day. I think that that's something that a lot of people, sometimes lose in the chaos and the rush. But take note of just who you're running into and what the experience has been like, because it is a humbling thing to push yourself forward and say that I'm the right candidate for the job. So. More than anything, win, lose, or draw, you want to know that you've gotten the most out of the experience. Obviously, we want everyone on this call to come out on the right side of the election. But like Rob said, sometimes it doesn't happen on the first try, and there's always an opportunity to build off of what you've done. And we'll be here if and when, regardless of the result, you want to take another crack at it.
Yeah. On that note, folks, thank you for attending this training. I hope that you got something out of it. I hope we're able to answer some of the questions that you have about what this last 2-week period can look like. I invite you all, if you have more questions that pop up or things that you want to be able to get some answers to, join our Discord, where you have 24-hour access to a community of other candidates like yourselves. They helped us to build this curriculum that we've done with our trainings over the last several months. You'll have access to the PAs who have been on this call on that Discord as well. My colleague Quinn is going to drop a link to that Discord in the chat for you guys in just a moment here. We also have a couple more events coming up that we're going to do between now and the end of the year. Namely, we have an Ask Me Anything next week that we're going to be doing with Andrew Yang about the growth of the independent movement. We are going to do an election night toast to celebrate all of our candidates and also kick off our efforts with election night reporting, a really important effort to track all of the independent candidates who are running for office throughout the country. And then, of course, we are going to have a election sort of recap in December, where we total out all of the wins that we were able to put up over the course of the last year. So hopefully this is not the last call that we will all be on together. Hopefully we'll be celebrating a couple of you winning your campaigns in just a couple of weeks, as well as at the end of the year. We look forward to seeing you all again. All right. Be well, everyone. We'll see you.